Good evening. I have a funny feeling because this is the very same room where I had the chance to defend my thesis 12 years ago. And I've been invited now, 2 years later, to speak about what's beyond the PhD, and in particular, what's beyond academia. I wouldn't have imagined being here 12 years later, speaking about something related to PhD, but just kind of inviting to follow a different path than those that most of you might be thinking of. And I think it's a path that is worth exploring because you might like it. So, first of all, I want to thank Professor Gutierrez for inviting me to share this talk. I hope it's useful, although many of the things I'm going to share with you, maybe having brilliantly presented by the previous speaker, I'll just insist on some of them. And I will just come into or transit to some professional environments where you might not feel that comfortable compared to how you feel now within the academic environment. But it's something you might be interested in. And any complaints, they tell Professor Gutierrez so that he doesn't invite me anymore if there's any venue like this where I can have the opportunity to talk to other people. And an additional warning, so this is only my experience. Don't try to get any, I'm not a scientific related to these kind of things. I'm just going to share what I've suffered, what I've enjoyed, what's been my experience doing the transit recently from academia to the industry. So as it's written there, follow any advice at your own risk. And when Professor Gutierrez told me about this talk, I thought I didn't have much to share, but just what I actually had experienced. So that's what I'm going to do for the following 2 hours. Not really, but I could. He said I could, but I will just try to condense that. And let me just say a few things about myself. I'll go into that further during the talk. I present now myself as founder of baobab soluciones, as Professor Gutierrez already said. And I still like to say that I'm a professor of this university. I'm on leave right now, since September the 1st. But I like to present myself as a person that is living in those two worlds. Now I'm more devoted to the second one, in terms of in chronological order, but I still like to be connected to the academia, as is the case, and that's why I enjoyed the process of doing this reflection about how I had been working along the process during my whole career. And I'll give you this quote. It's not very good, but it'll be somewhere later on probably, so that I invite you to be connected on LinkedIn, which is a wonderful network, as you probably know, so that who knows what we can do in the future together. So I just wanted to start something which is like a motto of my life. This is something that said Rafael Salafranca, la vida se trata de aprender a divertirse. Find the subtitles there. And he used to be my flatmate 10 years ago. Now he's my partner, and still we're friends. And this is one of the things that I've kept in everything I've done. I've tried to enjoy and learn with everything I've done. And you can even combine some level of suffering with enjoying. That's kind of weird, but after you accomplish what you wanted to do, you are able to be aware of the joy in that. And you can, of course, be aware of what you learned. And that's something that has been guiding everything I've done ever since I started working. So let me just say briefly that I had any real vocation for any particular industry. When I was a kid and someone asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I didn't know what to say. I just wanted to teach. I like that. I remember when I was a kid, I took my exercises from previous grades and I graded again as if I were the teacher, because I liked teaching, but I wasn't that passionate though. And I started aeronautical engineering. I did my first course, and I switched to the second one and came to this school because I wasn't that passionate about planes, so I was to spend the rest of my life relating to them. I like to fly, but I didn't want to design them. So I arrived to my 4th year in industrial engineering, and I just noticed that there's the Spanish there because the industrial engineering concept is different from the rest of the world. Industrial engineering concept is a broader concept, and it relates to electrical, civil engineering, and many other things. So I got to the 4th year where I started my degree, by the way. Felipe was one of my professors. He introduced me into finance and business administration. So that's, again, a funny thing of this talk. And I started to enjoy that area of knowledge, but I was still not very passionate about any particular industry. When I finished my degree, I thought of going to work as exchanging my money for my time for money, which is okay, and everybody does that, but I didn't like that. I don't know why. And I decided, as the other option, to start my PhD and started teaching. And I remember in the very first class I had in my major in industrial engineer, we had this full professor that already passed away, Juan Ramón Figuera, and he quoted Bernard Shaw, and this is something that has been in the back of my mind ever since, that he said something like, he rewrote the quote, and he said like, okay, if you can do anything, just teach it. And he even went further. If you're very bad at doing things, you can be even a minister of a country, or you can be rector of a university. I won't go that far, but that's remained. And something I had very clear in my mind is that I didn't want to be this guy, very related to theory, teaching in a class, just surrounded by books, and just creating some theory that was very far away from the world. So from the very beginning, I tried to stay close to companies and their problems. These are some of the companies I had the chance to work with during my period prior to founding Baobab. In particular, I worked for a CLH. Well, technically, I developed my research in collaboration with a CLH, which is the Spanish company that moves oil derivatives mainly by pipeline, sending all kinds of products from one point to the rest of the points, so from refineries to end destinations. And I developed my thesis in an algorithm to schedule these products so that you can deliver them on time to meet customers' demand and at a reasonable cost or at the minimum cost. And I also devote some time doing some kind of consultancy, like the one I did for BP Solar, which is back then they used to manufacture cells and solar panels, and I did some capacity studies using simulation, which I enjoyed a lot. I did some research projects in collaboration with Renfe Cercanías, which is the railway company in Spain. And I want to highlight that I also was part of the board of directors of the previous director. And I had lots of fun there. It was a very tough work, but I had lots of fun there because I had the chance to apply everything I had learned so far related to what is my field of knowledge, which is optimization and simulation, or making better decisions by using mathematical methods or operations research. And during that time, I was in charge of scheduling all the activities within the university, the school, sorry, which has quite a few students, quite a few degrees. And I was in charge of coming up with something which could be put into action, like assigning classes and rooms. And also I had to do lots of emails. But it was something related to solving people's organizations' problems, which was something I always was very concerned about, and I wanted to be following that path. So eventually, in 2011, I set up Baobab Soluciones, and it has a very clear mission. And it's assisting companies to make better decisions. And what I mean by better decisions, I mean they have to make money. They have to have better profit and loss accounts. They have to save more money or sell more. And for that, we use math-based tools, mainly optimization, simulation, and now as we need to feed those models with valuable data, over the last years we've started working in the world of data science, so that we feed these tools with valuable data, like forecast or other types of information. And I've been doing what is written there ever since we started with the company. At the very beginning, my time devoted to the company was not that much, but still, I spent quite some hours on top of the hours I had to work here, within the framework that the university allows us for doing this kind of activities. So I was in charge of making sure that the projects were launched properly using the right techniques so that they could be sent to a successful end. I provided technical assistance And I was, of course, concerned about baobab's strategy to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to do or what we wanted to do. And now, ever since I got into the company in September the 1st, I'm working full-time there. I'm doing more of that kind of work, and I'm in charge of the training of baobab, which is something we care about a lot. We aim to having 20% of our employees be devoted to training, even publishing. And of course, there's a lot of business as usual you need to take care of, and a lot of things that are not very glamorous, but you still have to do them. And I'll leave some reference there for you to have an idea of the companies we work with. And for you just to give a hint of the problems we address, I'll just give some examples. For example, there are companies for which we do applications that allow them to manage their supply chain so that they can decide where to buy, where to produce, by which means they send products to what end customers, by what means, and so on. That in operational terms, but they also have tools to decide whether they should increase their capacity or they should locate new facilities somewhere and so on. We have projects related to routes in vehicles so that you deliver things at the right time. We have production application related to how to schedule things, schedule productions that you deliver on time at the right price, and so on. This is just to give you an idea of the projects we do and to have the framework for the rest of the talk so that you can know what I'm talking about when I refer to the rest of my insights. So what I've tried to do during my whole career is to take advantage of the valuable singularities we have in this world. Ilaria already highlighted some of them, and I want to insist on some of them, and I want you to be aware of them if you're not, and if you are, to make you even more aware of those. Those are valuable singularities that are useful in case you decide to take different path from academia, and I really think that. We just had a new employee starting working for baobab today, and she just got her PhD in December. And in the very job interview we had with her, you could tell she had a PhD, with the good and the bad things about a PhD. So many of the things that Ilaria said, and I'll go through some of them again, you could tell from her background, which made her a very good candidate. And we had the hope that she would be able to learn the rest of what we wanted her to be able to do. We'll get to that later. And I want to share these valuable singularities I still want to keep, or I try to keep, although I'm working for the industry, and the appealing challenges you might encounter in the industry, which it's a very different world in some ways comparing what happens with the academic world. So in what follows, I apologize in advance if what I'm going to say is so obvious. I checked with Professor Rodriguez, and he said that it wasn't. I'm not sure if it is. I apologize. If not, okay, you can do your emails. And because we don't have much time, I'll do just generalizations about things that I deem are worth doing. But there you can also find exceptions about what I'm going to do. So I'm just trying to evaluate the extreme situations you can find to make more clear the differences between the academia and the industrial world. So what I would say are the gifts I got from my PhD, which you're about to finish, and my time in the academia. I often said, and I'd like to share that with you, that people don't believe me when I say that I want to get back to academia, but it is true. Actually, I'm going to teach in the second semester for free. There's this kind of position which is venia docendi, by which you can teach without getting money, which I think it pays off. I did my math, and the fun I have and what I get from the university is more than enough for me to come here 4 hours a week and teach what I've been teaching for the whole of my life. So I did the math and it pays off. So I'll be back. And I'll be back because there are many things I love about this world I want to share with you, and that are also valuable when you're out working in the industry. I won't insist that too much. Ilaria already said that. You're used to this kind of environment where you have people from all over the world. And I learned to think universally. It's not only that I had the chance to meet other people from other countries, which I did, but one of the things I noticed when I approached some customers is that they are recluded in their small world, although this is changing. Let me just do a comment on this. Maybe I'm too biased about how things are in Spain. Things could be different in the rest of the world, and I'm not aware of the rest of the whole world. But I can tell that comparing how things are in the university and how things are in the companies I've been working with, you don't find that many people thinking that universally in industry. And that's something which is very valuable, because when you think of a problem, you don't think of your own single problem. You think that somebody has had that problem before, or some problem similar to that. That's why that literature review Ilaria was referring to is something that is not that common in industry. And you'll find, I had the chance to find, you're having the chance to find problems that are different from yours, which is very valuable. You find many people doing the same thing over and over again in industry, and not being able to do the switch to addressing different problems. And that kind of training is very good. You've learned to confront different approaches, maybe different from yours, and see and do a critical review of what you're thinking. You have the chance to meet to find different fields of knowledge and explore if what there's in another different field of knowledge is valuable for yours. And of course, you've met other cultures, which is very valuable. And this is not only a skill that is valuable, I would dare say it's a mindset referring to how you live and how you work. And that is very valuable, because you'll think universally probably for the rest of your life. And this is not something you won't find that easily in industry. And that makes you valuable for someone who's going to hire you. This is the case with the woman that started working for us. We could tell that from the way she was. We do something in Baobab when anyone applies for a job. They have to go through a series of tests. We give them kind of homework, and they have to deliver it, and they have to defend it with us. And you could tell from her that he was thinking that way, and that is very valuable. Another thing is, of course, you know this. This is the timeline for my, I hope, paper to be published next month. This is kind of an extreme situation. Hopefully your timelines are a little bit better than this, but I started working on something in 2013, and I'll get it published hopefully next month. And I went through several major revisions to minor revisions related to editing, so it took quite a long time when it comes to publishing. So that's something I had to suffer several times, not with these timelines. And the short story is sometimes even sadder. And I'm borrowing this sentence from Woody Allen, like the most beautiful sentence in the English language is not "I love you," but accept it for publication. So with this, I want just to remark that being resilient and perseverant is something that is very common to people in academia. Because if you find an approach that fails, you try and find another one, if not another one, and so on. And you learn a lot of the process, because there's a reflection or a tendency to reflect about what has been gone wrong or right that is not that common out there. And another thing, when I think in hindsight about my PhD, I realized that was a huge task. You know that, of course, but I think you'll realize of that even a little bit later. I remember when I was a PhD student, you went to bed. The last thought of the day was for your PhD. You woke up, first thing in the morning, you thought about your PhD, and you think it's something is not going to finish ever, because you don't feel you're going to get what you're supposed to get. And the good thing about that is after that, anything you encounter, any task that is given to you might seem like a minor thing. And that is my experience. So it's kind of a very hard training that will turn everything you do afterwards, or at least that is what happened to me, something which is a piece of cake. And I think it, maybe even, because, well, maybe we'll talk about that later, because the process of coming up with that is something related to you kind of alone, whereas the rest of the thing you're going to do, even if you're in academia or if you go to industry, you'll be working with some other people. So coming up with a PhD was a harder task for me compared to founding my company. And I say that we're 25 now in our company. It sounds like a huge challenge, and actually it is. But I felt that easier to accomplish than getting my PhD. Really. I never felt so depressed as when I had to face some of the failures I had over my PhD. That never happened with my company. It's a pity that you cannot see this the right way, because I wanted to share with you, it was animated. Probably you can recognize the table on your left, which is something that I pretty much got randomly from a paper, which is a nicely displayed table with some footnotes and everything very accurately presented. And to the right, you have, it's a pity, you cannot see it, but this is a table we gave to one of our customers to fill it in with information that we had to use for getting some data loaded into an application. And we used this formatting they have in Excel, so that we didn't allow them to use some formats. And we have dates here. We have fields where you have to write the data, and sometimes you find even a text. You can even figure out in this column that not all the data are with the right format. So what I want to highlight here is that that table wouldn't be acceptable in the academic world. So that, combined with something as naive or as simple as it might seem from your point of view, that everybody uses Google to search for things. Even my mom does that when anything happens to her phone. But you're used to not just Google Scholar, but you're using any other kind of database. So you're used to get to where the most advanced knowledge is. And that's something which is not that common. People don't know what Google Scholar is. And for you, it's something like as common as Google. So you are used to do that. This is something we do in our company. I think we're kind of singular in that sense. But any time we find a customer, or if we're preparing a meeting with a company about whatever problem they have, we tend to go to Google Scholar and find what papers we can encounter related to that problem. For example, last time we were preparing a meeting, it was about the rostering problem, assigning shifts to people that work for a company. And we found the largest paper I've ever found in my life, which was like 130 pages long, out of which I think 80 pages were just references. So it was amazing. So we had every single problem related to this rostering problem in the literature. That gives you a lot of power if you want to go to these guys, because you know every singularity that anyone in the world has studied. It was a nice review. So with this, I want to say that you're used to aiming high. You try to get the best knowledge, and you try to be rigorous. So you look for the most advanced knowledge. You're used to build upon previous knowledge. You just don't copy. You don't reproduce what has been done before. You're supposed to make relevant contributions. That's tough, as you may already know. Things like, I think that, you cannot just give your opinion, and that's it. What happens in other contexts. You have to prove things and give evidence, because you'll go through a revision process, and people will be tough with you, and your work will be exposed afterwards. So again, this is something that is not that common in industry, and it is very valuable, and I've tried to keep doing that and trying to extend this kind of approach to my current company when I approach any problem I find in industry. This is I just typed game theory. It's something everybody knows about. We've all seen the movies. And I found that amount of papers. But OK, there's only one notch. I'm not just inviting you to be mediocre and just to try to get the papers published and not try to be a well-known person as John Nash was. But it's just something I learned during my PhD and along my career within the academia, which is being humble. I used to be a very good student, very good grades. I just failed one exam in my whole 7 years studying engineering, and I started trying to get things published, and I realized that there were far more people intelligent there than me. And I invited myself to not fall into the temptation of thinking that always the grass on the other side of the fence is greener. So you have, this is an invitation, and I've tried to live with that, to try to be as rigorous and to provide as many good contributions as possible, but at the same time to be humble enough not to be despair, because you cannot, it's very difficult for you to be top one. If you can, congratulations, but that wasn't my case, and I had to learn how to be humble. And you have a very rich toolkit that can be used, and I won't go through this because Ilaria already discussed them. And I just want to say that what she said it might sound, I don't know. When I was writing this, I was thinking maybe this is obvious. I don't think it is. And I just invite you to reflect on that, because those are valuable skills you have and you can put into practice. So that's what I recognize as valuable things I've learned throughout my career in academia, and that I tried to extend, and that you can use beyond that world. Of course, if you remain here, that's of course useful, but it can be used outside as well. And I wanted to explore some things that are the things I like about the world in industrial context, which is the reason why I decided to go and work for my own company. Because although the previous things that are there are things that I value, and that's why I still want to be related to academia, there are things that at least for a while, helped me make the decision to spend the time in my own company working full time. The first thing, I just want to show something which is very relevant, and it's probably the most important thing for my decision. What you have up there is the typical formulation of an optimization problem, the basic thing that I teach, or I'll teach in a couple of weeks here at this school, which is the mathematical formulation for optimizing some objective functions subject to some constraints, and that allows you to make decisions related to many different problems. And what I like about working in industry is that you're able to turn this into actually saving, for example, 1 million euros annually for a company in energy. And that's actually one of the projects we had for one of the companies that you had in the previous slides. We developed a model. It took us two months to do it, and it was very fulfilling to be able to turn that into actual figures, measurable outputs, that was what I now recognize as things that I at least like. And that goes with a lot of work, taking requirements, developing, doing tests, integrating the tool, getting that into production, improving whatever is needed as things change in the system. And I would just summarize that in the most important thing I find interesting about the industry, which is living in the italics real world. I'd like to go beyond formal problems. Sometimes I find papers where you have a nicely defined formal problem, which you study and you extend a little bit, and you get a nice feature that is worth studying, and you get another paper. And I think that is interesting because I go to the literature and I use it, but I wanted to go beyond. I don't want to describe that in opposition to academia, just as another way to proceed with what it is in academia. And what I don't like is the made-up problems, because we'll get to that later. Simplifications are not valid, or not so much valid, or at least you have to justify very well. Sometimes you're working on a paper and there's something that doesn't look so nice, and let's assume whatever, and you keep going. But in this case, you have a customer to which you have to give a solution. So this simplification might not be valid. So you cannot just override that and keep working. And there's a direct impact in what you're working, often measurable, as I told you before. And the funny thing about that, what I like about that, is that there's real people involved, and you can see what happens. This is something that happened in the project I mentioned before. When we were taking requirements, there was a team of engineers that used to do the planning of all the plans. to reduce the electricity bill and to being able to produce what they had to. And we were there to create a new tool for them to assist them in the process of coming up with plans. And there was a very difficult moment when one of the guys told one of the young guys, one had just finished his degree, he was a very clever guy, and with Excel was able to come up with a plan. And they told him, okay, you're digging your own grave if you tell these guys what you're doing, because they'll substitute you. So it was a very tough moment, because that wasn't our intention, and we were honest back then, and we still are. And we were able to convince him that we were giving him a better tool than Excel and allow him to do better things with that. And it was very interesting, but because now this person is in charge of maintaining this tool, he learned the basics of what we do so that he could work alone and being able to extend what we did to other plants in the company. So it's kind of fulfilling to be able to change somebody's life in a good sense and have an impact on a company, and an impact which is not a minor one. Another thing that I like a lot about industry is that we are very results-oriented. Okay, this can be understood in a very broad sense, because academia is very well result-oriented. Sometimes we're very paper-oriented. If you get published, you're okay. If not, you're not. But in our case, you have to deliver. And sometimes this is something I've done in the past, and I find it very challenging, and sometimes you make lots of money out of it. We have assumed risk-based schemes or objective-based schemes. So what I mean by that is sometimes we come to a customer, we have a project, we say, okay, this is the price, and they think it's too much. And sometimes what we've done in the past is, okay, we'll do something. We agree upon a way to measure the savings you're going to have, and we'll get half of the savings of the first year, which is fair. What we found in that case is sometimes, okay, what if this is too much? Okay, but what they were forgetting, or what they were concerned, is about the money they had to pay, but not the saving they would have that very same year, because they were saving half the amount provided with the tool, and the rest of the years that they were saving that money. So I think the fact that you have to deliver something that has to be translated into some figure is something I particularly like. And this is something we find, this is a weakness we find, and I'm telling you this because I think it's important, that we find when meeting people coming from academia. I think we speak different languages, and one of the things in which we are different, and when it comes to how we measure the impact on how we evaluate the quality of what we do. Especially if you're thinking about transitioning to the industrial world, because they'll ask you for money. After anything you put on a table, they'll give you, okay, this is okay, but I want a figure. And probably there will be people that only will read the figure. And the figure is nice, they will keep reading. If not, they won't keep reading. So some of the things we realize when we do this training, this selection process to our candidates coming to our company, we ask them to, for all the tasks they have to do, to come up with a non-technical report. We tell them, okay, imagine you have to tell how this was done and what you obtained to the sales director of the company, of our company. And they fail that all the time because they get into very technical details. And we want just to check, we know this can happen, we train them up afterwards, but we want to check if they have these kind of things in their mind. If they're thinking if, okay, the sales director doesn't mind if you used a genetic algorithm or a simulated annealing or it took you, no, it doesn't matter. He wants to know if you're going to solve the customer's problem and how much that will cost. So that's something that requires a change of mindset if you switch to the industrial world. And these things gives you an idea of relevance. I remember there was a meeting where there was the board of trustees of an organization, and they were discussing the annual budget. And there were people, very relevant people from different companies, and the president of the chair of the meeting was presenting. He was I had to say, he was from academia, and he was presenting results of the rest of the people, like very top guys in companies. And at some point, one raised his hand and said, okay, are those thousands or millions of euros? And the guy said, okay, they are thousands. And he said, okay, it's okay, there's no problem with that then. So he was just concern, if it's thousands, it doesn't matter. So you have an idea of what matters and what doesn't, because you have a measurement of how much things cost. For example, one of the things I do many times, I've done it when I enter the room, is how much this meeting costs. I don't know if you have ever asked this yourselves. So I know that when I have a meeting with my partners, we know exactly how a minute of our time costs. Sometimes we prefer to one person making a decision that will be cheaper because the consequence of a bad decision is more expensive, it's cheaper than the time we might expend making that decision. So this is the kind of things that I like about this context. So I did this math, and I started to doing that when I was in academia still. I went to a meeting with my colleagues, and I said, how much does it cost? And I asked myself the question, does this money pays off for the time we're investing? Sometimes it does. And also, another thing I like is scope, budget, and time, which is something you've heard of a lot of times in any kind of a project management a course. But I think it's something very, very relevant. Managing the out of scopes is something paramount. And I find it, of course, if you live in a wonderful world when you start a project and everything goes as planned, you won't have any of this, but eventually you'll always have. And managing how you negotiate with the customer if something new appears, and developing the skill to write the contract the nice way so that there's no ambiguity afterwards. These kind of things, I find them interesting. Maybe you don't, but I like that because, again, it has to do, as I said before, with the real world. Another thing I like about the industry, again, this is a generalization, is that merit, let's say, is more rewarded. People with the same position don't necessarily make the same money. So that is good if you produce. Maybe it's not that good if you don't produce. And people starting in the same position don't necessarily have the same career. And that is something that I like because it implies being responsible for your own destiny to some extent, at least. Okay, I'm generalizing here. And again, this is demanding and it's challenging, and this is one of the things I like about industry. Another thing I like is accountability. When you're given a task, you're responsible for that task. You have the authority and the system to make sure that it's done. You can resort to tools for you to make sure that is done. Of course, that might not happen, but you have those tools. And thanks to that, you are doing what you're supposed to do. And furthermore, you get resources to do interesting things if it pays off. If you have a nice business case explaining what you're going to do, and if it pays off, probably you'll get the money to do it if the budget allows for it. But there's a level of responsibility and authority that I like, which again implies a lot of sometimes difficulty, because you depend upon yourself, and you're going to be evaluated according to what you did. You cannot find any excuses. And another thing I like is agility and flexibility compared to, at least in Spain, the public administration, how companies work, as a rule, are more agile and more flexible, especially in small companies. You have a mutable hierarchy, you have flexible teams. You can find project managers that are developers in a different project. There's not a fixed hierarchy where it's difficult to progress. You might find working in different positions, and you can grow vertically and horizontally. I'm just giving an example of one of the engineers that finished his degree, and after a few years, he got a degree, a PhD degree as well. He started as an engineer, then he became an IT manager. He was a human resource manager. Sorry, there's a human missing there. No, sorry, it's here. Then he was the CIO, and now he's the corporate director of a large company in Spain. So this is something that you can find in the university. There are chances for you to do this. So to do this kind of transition, find yourself in different situations. And of course, in industry, you can be rigorous. You can still think universally. I suggest to be humble, you persevere, and you use your PhD toolkit. So my message here is that still that you can do. And, of course, You can make more money, usually, in industry than in academia, at least in Spain. My colleagues can tell you that is true or not. And some final thoughts. I've always seen, at least again, in my close environment, that the relationship between industry and academia is one to improve, because they give each other some things that they don't need. Sometimes they don't speak the same language, and that is a problem. I've been to meetings where I could actually tell that the language they were speaking wasn't the same. There was no possibility to collaborate. And I just wanted to share one of the things that I think are related to that lack of understanding. And there are some misconceptions that are two sides of the same coin. I don't know if you can read that. Those are two actual papers. One is Right or Wrong, Retaliation on a Voodoo Doll Symbolizing an Abusive Supervisor Restores Justice. That actually got published recently. Or Ovulatory Cycle Effects on Tip Earnings by Lap Dancers, Economic Evidence for Human Estrus. So that got published. So that's a good argument that we, now I'm thinking as an academic, we shouldn't give to the industry for them to say that what we do at the university or in the academia is useless. But this is a misconception that people in industry have, and maybe they have some reasons to think that. But when I talk to these people, I use the hat of my academic hat, and I tell them that that can happen. But there is a very valuable knowledge being created in the university and not used. And the other side of the coin is the opposite. I found that there was a colleague that used to say a lot that what is done here is not applied in industry. And my point was maybe it's not applied because it's not known. And if they knew that, it could be far better than what they're doing right now. And that is my experience. I've met many customers that are using very, very old techniques that are not efficient, that doesn't lead you to get results. And the technology and the knowledge is already available out there. And you can find papers for that. So I think this kind of a misunderstanding between the two worlds make things difficult for them to collaborate. And I try to do some bridge when I have the chance to hear any of those arguments, just in case it helps. And I want to remind you that no matter what you do, there's life, not only life in academia, not only professional life, but there's life after the PhD. And, well, you're about to finish, but when I think of my PhD time, I remember that I was so focused on that single task. And maybe that can be despairing sometimes, but I invite you to enjoy that low stages of being focused on one single task, because that's that's not going to happen ever again. So you'll have to do managerial tasks if you are even in the academia. You'll have to teach, probably. You'll have to do many other things, so you won't be so focused anymore. So sometimes, well, when I used to be at the university and I saw PhD students, or when I'm working in my company and I see people working for a single project the whole day, I kind of envy them. So I invite you to enjoy that and have fun and learn on the way. And let me just finish by saying that PhD in academia are very useful, even if you don't stay there. That might sound something which might sound empty, but I'm totally convinced of that. Industry is a very rich and challenging option for PhD holders' careers. You need to do the switch, which is not easy, but it's doable, and you can take advantage of all the things you've learned and acquired here. And I would recommend you to be in touch with the world you're living most of your time, which is what I'm trying to do. When I was in academia, I was very in close contact with companies, and now that I'm working for my own company, I will try to be as close as possible to academia, because that's where richness is. So, and I just want to thank, because since this was related to academia and to my company now, I'd like to thank three of my major mentors, which are Juan Ramón Figuera, Maria Ramos, and Javier Carrasco. They were those who believed in me when I started here. They gave me the chances to grow as a professional, and They contributed highly to shape who I am. And I want, again, as well, to thank you, the baobab team. You can see a picture there of one of the paellas we cook regularly. That was one we did the 20-something in December. Of course, I want to thank you, and I'm available for you now and anytime you have any questions, complaints, or anything you want to say. Thank you.
So, not sure if you have questions for Álvaro. Okay, thank you. Here you are.
Thanks for that really interesting presentation. So a question I have is, you said in 2011 you started the company. How challenging was it to do that beside your academic engagements? You know, did that mean you have to work every weekend, and was life, how manageable was it, and how much more manageable is it now that you're more full-time?
Well, it was very hard. Actually, there were like 2 years where what I did was work for the university beyond the time I was supposed to, work for my company, and sleep. That was all. And well, that's not true. I had some time to go to the swimming pool, but it was very demanding. But it was the time to do that, and basically I worked all around the clock. At the beginning, we were only 4 people, and one was working full time. The other 3 partners were just working part time, the time we had. And until we gained some projects and gained some volume, we couldn't start hiring new people and getting them into the team. So for the first 2 years, it was very, very, very demanding. I'm glad I did that. I think we had some luck as well. We did good things, but for those 2 years, I actually had no life. The result is very good now, but I think I was, let's say, younger then. And I could do that, but it was very, very demanding.
That's 2011 to 13, right? Like
yes, pretty much. That was 2 very tough years. And it just did that.
And it got better?
Sorry?
It got better as time?
Yeah, definitely. After that, we started getting new people into the company, and I still had to work a lot, but nothing compared to that. Because at the very beginning, it was just the 4 partners, and we just didn't make enough money even to get money out of that. So it was just investing our time and the money we were not getting to get money afterwards. But after a few years, after 2 years, things changed, and now things are very different. When you have 25 people, it's a different thing. You can, things that I was referring to happen there. I deliver a task, and it gets done. I was telling that to one of my friends, and he said, "Okay, you're the boss. You're supposed to be obeyed." But I think that happens, and now we are well organized so that I don't have to invest all of my free time working for my company.
Just a quick follow-up question, can I ask? So how important were the other people you were working with, like the other partners that were initially there?
We were 2 professors, and I think we had the knowledge of what we were going to use for our projects for companies. We had a student that had just finished his degree, and actually he's now starting his PhD in France. So we are I think 3 PhD holders and 1 PhD student in our company, which is a nice percentage. And this was the one who started working full time for the company. He's the best student I've ever had. And that's the reason why I decided not to hire them, and we wanted to be with us embarked on the project. And there was a 4th one, which was a key one, which was one that didn't come from the university. He's a physicist, but he had been working his entire life in an industrial world, and just doing a kind of devoted to sales from a very technical perspective. But anyways, he was a salesperson. And this is the reason why we succeed, because we changed our mind. We were used to thinking in academic terms many times, and he was always thinking in terms of money and scope and what we were doing and so on. And it was he who started translating what we were doing when we approached customers, although he wasn't very expert in our field. He didn't know much about it. he's improved a lot. Now he can go to any meeting and explain what we do. But that was a very important person, because there was another attempt to create baobab in 2008, and it didn't succeed, because we didn't have someone who came from the industry. That was the key reason.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Alvaro. It was really interesting. Well, I got stuck at one certain point in your presentation when you said you were not enough convinced about the problematization provided in the academia. Sometimes we just make up the problems which maybe do not exist in reality. So how do you differ that? Like a customer approaching you in the company tells that he has a problem, so that this makes it a real problem because they pay for that, or in the end it's like all problems are somehow constructed, right? Like, are you asking there really why is this the problem, or just that having a more pragmatic approach that you will be paid more on that makes it a real problem for you?
Okay, that's a very good question. I would say that when it comes to a customer coming to us, or us coming to them about a problem, and they're interested in solving us a problem which has some nice feature, I think I have no doubt about that. If they're willing to invest money, well, I think there's a problem there. So I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, that they know enough about their business so that to take for granted that that problem actually is someone's problem, and it's worth investing some time and money to solve it. So it's kind of a tautology, if you want, but I would just say that if there's someone who's willing to pay money there, to put money there, because it's a problem. If not, that might be the case, but that just won't happen once, because second time that guy will have to justify why he wanted that money or to do that. And when it comes to a singular feature in a paper, yes, you're right. It's difficult to tell if that will be useful or not. But maybe there is a set of extreme cases where if you're close to problems actually occurring in real world, you can tell for sure that's never going to happen. It's some singularity that just to justify that the computational times to get a solution is a little bit higher, and you have to come up with a new method. I don't have a general answer for that, but sometimes you have problems that for sure you can tell from the problem that they are useless. Sometimes that is not the case. For example, and I use my academic hat in that case. For example, there's this TSP problem, the travel salesman problem, where you have to visit a set of cities. And this problem arises when actually trying to come up with a route for visiting a set of cities. And research has been working on solving larger and larger problems. And one might think, okay, why am I going to study a problem where you have to visit 1 million points? That's not a real problem, and it's not interesting. But the fact is, it actually is interesting because, for example, in a medical environment, you have to evaluate samples, and maybe you have to visit 1 million points. And if you do it faster, you get results for a diagnosis earlier. So although that might not look applicable, like going to that level to that number of cities to visit in terms of their TSP, it's valuable. So it's not that easy to give a general rule about when some paper is valuable and when it is not. But maybe you agree with me that those papers there were useless. So there's a field in between where things might not be that clear. But I think that happens. I don't have a figure, a number to give an estimate of how often that happens, but that happens. I like to be away from that. But I understand it's not easy to give a general rule, but sometimes it's obvious. Other times it might not. This is the case with the TSP. You're welcome. Thank you.